Right, hopefully. Hopefully. This is all about to happen. Wednesday evening. Come on, guys. Anyone turning up this evening? Sorted out my system now so I can actually see when people start turning up, and I know somebody's turned up. Jamie. How are you, Jamie? David. Leslie, Marcus. All the chaps first through the door. Keen. I thought I had my system worked out. Rebecca. Narisa. We are all well, yes. We're in fine fettle. Thank you for asking. No health issues at all. Life goes on very appropriately. Nat. Glad you could make it again. Jamie, well, recovering from a paddling pool dip with Archie. Wow. How is he? I'm sure he's an absolute bundle of joy, is he? Julia, how are you? John, nice to see you all. Oh, we're up to 22. I'm behind. Oh, God, I'm behind the curve this evening. What's the matter with me? Sue? Hello to you. And Sanat and Glenda. Esther, glad you could make it. Liz, Scott, Sally. I'm very well, Sally. Well, I say I'm very well. I did go for a 4.5. I didn't go for a 4.5 hour run, Paul. I went for a 4.5 mile run this afternoon. And yes, I'm feeling it. Thank you for asking. It's getting better. Now all the pain is condensed into my calf muscles and my ankles. Especially when I go up hills, somewhat unsurprisingly. But the rest of me is fine. So it's like I'm hoping that I can just sort of squeeze the pain away finally when finally my calf muscles and ankles get used to running again, and then I'll be off. Scott, Liz, Amy, Keith, Peter. Amazing fun. I bet it is. An excuse to play in a paddling pool, Jamie. Natalie, hi Natalie. Yasmin, glad you could make it. So, what should we talk about other than my... Oh, let's talk about Julia's abscess. Sorry, you've got an abscess and I'm laughing. Abscess on tooth, making seated meditations challenging over the last couple of days. But you still sat, and that's the most important thing. Scott, great effort for a 4.5 mile run. Thanks, coach. That's what I need. Some good feedback. I mean, I say it's 4.5 miles. Georgie, Olivia, so glad you could make it. I say it's 4.5 miles. It feels like 4.5 miles. Maybe that's the truth. I won't tell you how long it took, though, Scott. Right. So, Julia, yes. So you still meditate even though you've got a reason apparently not to, and that's a really healthy sign, because one of the things I was thinking about today was that so many people have a cut-off point. You know how I talk about how there is nothing in meditation that should not be in the meditation. it's all inclusive. There's nothing that's outside of it. If you've still got something outside of it that you're saying, no, that's got nothing to do with the meditation, then unfortunately you can't become enlightened. Whilst there are still things that you're not willing to look at and engage with and observe, when there are still things where you still want to deny them, you object to them, they say, you're saying to yourself, life should not include these things, then you're still craving, still wanting life to be different, still in denial, and you have to reach the point where there is absolutely nothing that you're not willing to look at. So I know it's painful, Julia, and good for you. Keep watching. See if you can go really into the sensations and really explore those sensations. See if you can see the difference between the tactile sensations involved, the pulsings, the temperature changes, the sharpness, the dullness. Hi Leslie, hi Barbara, Naxon. Nice to see you. And yeah, see if you can distinguish between the tactile sensations involved and the actual feeling components. So yes, I was thinking about that earlier, that people have cut-off points, and in my training, in the end, I had no cut-off point. There was nothing that I wasn't willing to look at. Yes, Lynn. So Lynn's question is, does that include phobias? I.e., do you also have to look at those? Absolutely, because phobias are fears based in a deluded view of life. You have to, so these are our challenges, these are the obstacles that make the path what they are. So if you've got a fear of elevators, Tom, so glad you could make it. You have to, Bodil, did I say hello? Barbara, did I say hello? Hello. So yes, absolutely includes phobias. And that reminds me, guys, I reviewed the last live stream, and I was self-critical that I wasn't reading people's comments and questions out properly. So what would be helpful for me is if you can keep the questions quite short, because if I'm confronted with a very long explanation of a question, I sort of go a bit and I never really express the question properly, and I think that might affect people's ability to understand what I'm going on about. So, passionate resistances to snakes. All right, okay. Give me a tough one to work on. Okay, all right. Well, there is the animal aspect to our nature, isn't it? Which is preservation. But tell me seriously, how many snakes do you come across? Let's say on a weekly basis. We can do it monthly if you like. Oh, how many snakes did I come across in Bradford-on-Avon last month? Ooh. Oh yeah, that's right, none. Alright, so we might come across spiders, but how many poisonous spiders? Alright, so if you're in India like Nagson, this might be a slightly different conversation. But in Bristol? How many types of poisonous spider are there? Few, but don't even like them on TV. Say, well, how many times have you been bitten by somebody or something appearing on TV? Well, let's go by month. In the last month, how many times have you been bitten by something on TV? So I think it's well worth looking at, Lynn. So, okay, so explore the whole world of snakes. So, challenge yourself to, look up snakes on Wikipedia. And just look at your responses, because your responses aren't none. Quite. So your responses, the phobia is just a passionate resistance, but it's not reasonable. Now, if you are in I remember having to evade a scorpion when I was in Dharamsala in India, and there are a few sort of wild beasts that could really do you a bit of harm. But so there's that aspect of our nature, which is the survival instinct. So that's fair enough, but that's in relation to a specific threat, a specific danger. And of course we're naturally wired to be wary of snakes and spiders and so forth. But if you learn more about them, I think that's the key. With all phobias, with all fears, it's learning more about the subject, I think. And then you realise that there's this richness to a snake. There's a richness to a spider. They're unique. They've got their own world that they inhabit in their own ways. So if it's elevators, you have to overcome your fear of elevators by gradually heading towards elevators. So maybe the idea is, you just stand with somebody else who's there to help you, and you look at people coming in and out of elevators, and they all seem fine. No pics. Okay, well you'll work up to pictures, Lynn. That's it's a staged thing that gradually. And at each point it's observing the responses, isn't it? So, all right, you do a little bit of pictureless study of snakes online. You learn about their natures and what they get up to and so forth. You deal with the aversion that's arising mindfully. You're just mindfully aware of it. And it subsides, and you do that a few times. And then maybe you get to the point where you can actually start looking at the pictures and... Oh yes, Leslie, it's a very good point. The fear can come from having seen a parent responding in that way. So you copy that behaviour. It could also be past life. Maybe you had an unfortunate incident with a snake in a past life. It may be an excessive magnification of that survival instinct that kicks in just through seeing a movie with snakes in. Did you watch the film Snakes on a Plane, Lynn? I reckon you didn't. But maybe we should get it out on DVD and watch it on Netflix. Such a strong, unpleasant feeling, yes. And what you're responding to with the craving is aversion to the feeling. So that's the craving, is aversion to the feeling. So that means the next time you see a snake, the feeling is even more unpleasant. Or it's a stronger response, which then... So it's paticca samuppada. So it's understanding the links of condition-dependent origination and recognising how it is that you're constantly kicking the problem into the future. So that you're like, I don't want to experience this suffering now, so I'm going to reject it, which means that you have to experience it again in the future, so the resistance to it is even stronger in the future. So the only way to free yourself from that, kicking it into the future the whole time, is to be willing to suffer with it now, and to recognise that it's actually the craving and the wanting life to be different which constantly magnifies the problem. A fear of moths, John. I overcame it when I came across a huge dead one in Greece and chose to take the opportunity to pick it up and kiss it. Now I'm fine. John, in that moment you became Mothman. I've been watching too many superhero movies. John is Mothman. This, or an association, so it can seem ridiculous because the original fear was caused by something else. Yes. It's a very good point, Liz. Hadn't thought of that, yes. Yeah, sorry, Lynn, we don't want to focus in on you. But yeah, to get back to your original point, yeah, phobias. And you can learn so much through that process. So that's the thing about craving. It's like we don't want to acknowledge, we're in denial of the fact that life is suffering. Becky, there are so many people that are scared of meditating, you wouldn't believe it. So many people think, because there's this innate distrust, people have an innate distrust of their own minds. And there's this terrible feeling that well, if I just relax into the moment, anything could come up. Which of course is the whole point, but so it can be very challenging at first for some people learning to meditate. But it is an unreasonable fear. Because anything that come up could only come up because we've put it in there in the first place. Oh, so you're not scared of little old meditation teacher, are you? I can appreciate that. Yeah, a meditation teacher could come across as scary, but actually, it's again, it's an irrational fear. But it's the same situation for any kind of fear. It's the for those intent on a spiritual training who want to overcome suffering, you're going to have to look at it. You can't just keep kicking the problem into the future. Like, when we crave, we're denying the fact of suffering, the first noble truth, the fundamental fact that life is suffering. We're going, nope, not going to deal with that now, and we kick it into the future. Marcus, do you have any advice on labelling Paul? Oh, labelling Paul. I see what you mean. I was watching a sensation in my back, was feeling the temperature on my back, labelling it as warm, but thought that the sensation... Guys, whenever I see more on your comments, that means that the comment is too long. Just, if you can keep them short and concise, that would be really helpful for me. Thank you. I was watching a sensation in my back, was feeling the temperature on my back, labelling it as warm, but thought that the sensation would be no different ultimately no matter what I labelled it, conventionally, which made me wonder why I was labelling anything. Well, okay. Don't have to label anything. But what is the purpose of labelling? The labelling is helping us to locate and distinguish phenomena from one another. Sorry, I'm going to have to do that again because I burst into song in the middle of it. The reason we label is to help our ability to define states. So, for instance, if it's just something as relatively straightforward as a moment of hearing, by learning to accurately define what is perception, what is the object, what is the sense base, what is the consciousness, to be able to tease out the details in that way means that you are then able to observe the relationships between all those different phenomena. So you can see that hearing only arises because there's an object. If there's no object, hearing doesn't arise. there has to be a sense base. If there's no sense base, the ear, the sensitive matter of the ear, neither the object nor hearing takes place. So there's a conditional relationship between all these elements, including perception. So it's not just that we're noting it as warm, we're recognizing the differences between things. Like, for instance, you're talking about your back, but in ultimate terms there is no back. That's a perception. And there's a tactile sensation, which is the warmth. There has to be the body, sensitive matter of the body, which registers that warmth. And then there is body consciousness, which is the knowing of that warmth. So if you don't do any of that, if you just sit there, and there are all kinds of physical and mental contacts occurring, but we're not really investigating because we're not noting, then it's essentially you just don't define anything. So that's why we note. So I'd say continue with that. Becky, sometimes I'm scared when I meditate alone at night. Okay. So there's the arising of self-concern. So in the times that you have meditated alone, have you come to any harm? In any of those meditations, were you eaten by a monster? Or, you see what I'm getting at, but this month, how many times have you been eaten by monsters when you were meditating alone at night this month? I suspect not many. Olivia, I'm aware of addiction to approval, recognition, control and the full trick there, Olivia. Something in me hops from one to another in certain situations. It is less frequent but still compelling and painful when it happens. This is such great stuff, guys, that you're telling me this, that you are, because of your mindfulness, you are far more aware of these habitual patterns. And that's the most important thing. And what we have to do is recognize that the fear, the desire for approval, recognition, control, power, whatever it happens to be, it's firstly acknowledging it, being with it, and recognizing that it does not define you. So it's not my desire for approval, it is the mental quality of desire for approval. Taking the self-view out of it, taking the identification out of it. Because as you take the identification out of it, you no longer have to be judgmental. And because you no longer have to be judgmental, it allows you that certain distance to really just see the whole process and let the whole process unfold. And your own innate wisdom, your faculty of wisdom, is stimulated, and you recognise that that's not helpful to you, that that's actually problematic. So it's really critical that there is that disidentification, because if you identify with it, then it's you're fighting with it, there's self-concern surrounded around it. So the most important thing is, it's not to kick the problem into the future by resisting it, but looking at it squarely in the face, acknowledging what it is, and realising that none of these qualities define you. I was talking to somebody today and I was making this point that it's not that, as Jackie's famous quote goes, it's not that you get rid of the things you find hard to handle. What you get rid of is finding them hard to handle. And so the quality is still able to arise, but it just simply doesn't mean anything to you anymore. Because you're mindful, you clearly comprehend what it is. It's so much easier to put it down. And I was saying to a person that Like when I first gave up smoking, when I entered into the monastery, I was very, very aware that there were occasions when I really wanted a cigarette. But it got to the point where I became completely unaware of the desire to have a cigarette. So it's something that I didn't have to look out for anymore. It just, through lack of use, it just became an irrelevancy and just drifted away completely. So it's a paradoxical thing, but what you have to first do is just fully acknowledge it, and each time it arises and you recognise it, is to note it, disidentify with it, allow it to run its course, it falls away, and over time it gets easier and easier, till in the end you just forget all about it. You forget that you ever had this addiction for approval or whatever it might be. Peter, does that mean on enlightenment there is no longer any fear at all in your world? There is no there is no world. All right, let's not go quite that far, Paul. The only fear that arises is, like for instance, before one of these live streams, I'll get a bit of a flutter. Before I do a Wednesday evening meeting here, remember those days? I'll get a little flutter before then. If I'm up a ladder, I'll get a little flutter. Because that's all reasonable, that's natural. That's as natural as breathing for human beings, because we have to have that recognition of some kind of dangerous situation. All right, it's not life or death, but it's, you've got to do your best here. You've got to be on point. And so there is this little flutter of fear, because it's doing a particular job, and it's doing a very useful job. So going back to Lynn's love of snakes, in essence, fundamentally, it's right to have a fear of poisonous snakes. So it's in our DNA, really, isn't it? But it's just that it gets magnified out of all proportions. We resist the fear because it's unpleasant, but the fear is actually, the unpleasantness is important because it's keeping us on point, it's keeping us in the moment. So there are times when fear is exactly the right response, but it's not coming from self-view, it's coming from the natural unfolding of conditioned and conditioning phenomena. And there, of course, is the complete and absolute understanding that there is no self in any of it. Oh, Becky, you just gave me a note. Like, no, I haven't been eaten by a monster lately. All right? Yes, you're right. You win, Paul. You're right. I haven't been eaten by a monster recently. I'll give you a little like for that one. There you go. So what you're saying is, I wonder if this is what I'm saying. Noting a sound is only the first step. One does not go back to the breath. Are you saying that you then unpack from the sound, you acknowledge the presence of the ear sense, the object that made the sound? Yeah, the ear base. Yeah, I mean, it's a gradual unfolding, Leslie, over time. The emphasis being the direct observation to the best of your ability, using your understanding of ultimate reality as it is at that moment. And then as you do more study and you practice more, then it becomes possible to unpack a particular experience in more detail. It doesn't take very long, once you know what you're looking at, to determine, well, really it's insight. It's insight knowledge. There's the stage after purification of mind, which is purification of view, and it's during that time, and there's the purification by overcoming doubt. And it's at those times that you've suppressed hindrances for the time being, and you're able to start determining what the aggregates are, what sense bases are. I mean, in terms of real experience. So you've got your map and you're checking your reality to the map and going, oh, that's what they mean by aggregates. Oh, that's what they mean by sense based. Oh, that's what they mean by conditionality. And there's this whole process of getting really familiar with the territory of ultimate reality. And then from that point onwards, as the actual insights into transience, unsatisfactoriness and non-self grow, develop, move forward, so your ability to tease out the detail of an experience into its components becomes easier and easier, essentially. Hope that made sense. Because is that what's meant by access concentration? Where at any time, access concentration, you see, goes from any time the hindrances are in abeyance. It can go from that to right before absorption in jhana. So in terms of level of concentration, it can go from momentary concentration, which is what we use for vipassana, all the way up to you're just about to enter into a jhana. So it's a very wide sort of frequency range, access concentration. And we operate, for doing sukha vipassana, dry insight, we operate just at the level of momentary concentration. So your concentration only has to be good enough that you're free of hindrances for the time being, and you can note the arising and passing away of mental and physical phenomena. I think Becky's still annoyed with me. I gave you a like. Okay, no more comments at the moment. Any more comments? I'll get a flurry now. Is there anything I haven't dealt with? Could you accidentally enter a jhana whilst practicing insight? Yes. 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 I mean, when we say accidental, what I've certainly experienced is it became clear it's sort of just the knowledge of what I had to do in order to enter a jhana became abundantly clear to me. And so, through practicing in the way I was normally practicing, the 5 jhana factors were coming together. Initial sustained application, initial and sustained application, pleasurable interest, happiness, and focus. And so it wasn't that I just let it happen, it was that it's like the purpose changed. And so I just did what I thought I had to do out of interest to see what would happen, and I went boom, straight in for a nanosecond, and then I popped straight back out again because I didn't have the depth of the maturity and the jhana factors to hold me there. So I know from experience that it can happen, definitely. And it's a beautiful experience when it does, but there's a stage on the insight path called knowledge of what is and what is not the path. And so a vipassana meditator who is intent on wisdom has to understand the allure of concentrated states. And there is definitely a time when you have to make the decision to forego, to renounce the path of samatha and keep going with the insight. What's the alternatives to dry insight then? Concentration meditation? Yes. So the Buddha taught different ways of approaching the whole problem of realizing freedom from suffering. So you can do all the stages of samatha first. So that's going through all the learning how to go into and come out of and master all of the fine material jhanas, and then all of the immaterial jhanas, and they're all levels of deepening absorption. And then, having accomplished all of that, you then turn your attention to the vipassana aspect, or you can do a combination of samatha and vipassana, which is going into, for a period of time, going into as deep a state of concentration as you can get to, then deliberately coming out, and then assessing all the factors that went to make up that concentrated state in terms of transience, unsatisfactoriness and non-self. Or you can do it the way Alan and Jackie taught it here and the way I teach it, which is you realise that unless somebody has at some point, either in this life or a previous life, has devoted significant amounts of time to developing samatha, then they're really going to struggle. In our culture, with our lifestyles, for people in the world, very, very difficult. A lot more possible for people if they only have to get to the stage of weak access concentration, momentary concentration, and work at vipassana from there. So that's why loving kindness or compassion meditation, the divine abidings, are so useful, because otherwise it's like vipassana can get very, you know that sound when you drag your nail down a blackboard? Vipassana can get a bit like that, and you need something sort of moist and wet and nice and lovely to sort of offset that tendency to be a bit. See what I mean? Because with vipassana, what we're doing is we're breaking life into little bits, aren't we? In order to examine the little bits and see how all the little bits interrelate to one another. So we're splitting life into bits, which is, you know, and what the metta does is it's like, what would you call it? It's like balm. So it softens everything up. And Leslie, I've been looking around for the next sound, smell, etc. Ah, yes, I mean that's your enthusiasm, and you don't. It's like these things. there's plenty of material to work with. We don't really have to. We don't really have to try that hard. It will. Naturally the mind moves to the strongest impingement anyway. So really, I was talking to somebody earlier today and saying that meditation is both being and doing. The being, just being, is 90% of it, and there's about 10% of doing. So really, it is for the workaholic, for the energetic type, It is learning to be. And then the little bit of doing is just noting when a sound comes to you, noting when a thought comes to you, noting when a smell arises. So waiting, being patient, waiting for the next experience to come along. And the mind naturally just tends to go to the strongest impingement at any of the sense doors that are operative. So, and I think if you relax in that way, you've got more spaciousness. You're not on the, you're so much more spacious and relaxed, and you can allow the objects to arise as they want to arise, and that's a much more relaxed approach. Because we lubricates, yes, that's the word, Becky. Thank you. So yes, I had another thought about. I'm always talking to students about resting content and waiting and letting, because you're not going to run out of material. You've got a lifetime. It's like, oh my God, I've got to see as many of these as I possibly can now, because we might run out of sounds sometime soon, or we might run out of tastes. So no, that's not going to happen any more than you're going to be eaten by a monster when you meditate. So you can relax and wait and let events come to you. Oh, can you reach any of the jhanas doing metta then? No, there's a limit. I think it's second jhana. Oh, you've got me there, Peter. I can't remember I have to go and look in the technical books. Can you get into, or can you do all the jhanas? Oh wow, got a great question from Sanat coming up. Because I think there's an issue with the second jhana about the Buddha calling it noble silence, because that's when discursive thought is removed in terms of the jhana factors. So I think technically you can get into first jhana. I would have to check that though, Peter. Or we can just get on and practice noticing things arising and passing away. Sanat, Mara the evil one, a person or just only metaphor? To my mind, Sanat, Mara is the personification of certain mental proclivities. So we create a devilish individual to stand for our desires, our lusts, and we think of it in terms of Mara putting temptation in our way. But really, it's just a personification. It's just giving it some kind of fictional representation. I think that's what I think. I've become aware of almost grabbing at the sounds, grasping for them as they arose. Well, it's just wanting to know, isn't it? Isn't it just wanting to know? And so is it just like a faith thing? It's just developing the faculty of faith to say, no, it's all right for me just to sit here and just acknowledge things as they become evident, rather than thinking that I've got to chase it down. I mean, it's the equivalent of what I've been talking about with the breath, whereas I'm saying, no, you can wait for each in-breath to come up. So you're not looking to impose yourself upon the breath. You're letting the breath do what it wants to do when it wants to do it, and you're just aware of it arising, and then you're just aware of it falling away again. So you rest and let the breath do the work. And in the same way, you can rest and let these physical and mental events do the work, because they're doing the work anyway. You know? So it's just taking a little bit of that wish to impose one's will to ensure success, and just releasing from that, just reminding yourself regularly during meditations, just, it's all right, I can just sit and let things come to me. And of course, there will then be an underlying issue which will emerge, which is that's dependent on you having faith that the instruction is right, whereas your conditioning is telling you, no, I need to, in order to get success, I need to impose myself on these objects and note them and look for them and chase them down. And to not be doing that will feel like you're not being yourself. You know, there might be a sense that you're not doing anything, you're not fulfilling your objectives. And so you have to recognize that underlying drive. You have to include that in the practice. Because if you can recognize, rather than just act out of that drive, you can actually recognize that drive. It means then you can observe and see how that arises and passes away. And then what's left is the ability truly just to rest in the moment with awareness, with clarity, and just to keep noting from there. Naturally, I feel there is a difference between dispassion and equanimity, but I'm not sure. Well, they're very closely related. So dispassion is the absence of passion surrounding with regard to objects. And equanimity is being even-minded with regard to objects. So they're very, very, very closely linked. So dispassion is the necessary precursor for turning away, and turning away is the necessary prerequisite for the mind alighting on that which neither arises nor passes away. So the whole of the insight training is, on each path, the path is leading up to, from seeing things arising, from seeing things passing away, from seeing things arising and passing away, through seeing the conditioned and conditioning nature of phenomena, that eventually, after a long Herculean battle, you reach this point of really genuine, deep, mature equanimity regarding formations. So you see all these formations arising and passing away, and you are entirely even-minded. There is genuine dispassion. The mind sort of loses its interest in trying to own or control anything. So there's this wonderful sense of release. And as the insight gets ever deeper, it reaches a point where there is this total loss of obsession with the occurrence of phenomena, and that's where then there is the brief recognition of that which neither arises nor passes away. And that's the supramundane path and fruition. So that's what everyone is heading towards with their insight knowledges. And there's no point. There's no point go, where am I in all of this? You know, it's like I was saying to somebody the other day that, you know, if I'm going into Bath and I see a signpost saying Bath this way, I don't jump out of the car and take a selfie of me with under the signpost and then send it to all my friends. So look, I am totally not interested in the signpost. I want to go to Bath. I've got things to do in Bath. You see what I mean? So don't get obsessed with the signposts. What exactly do you mean by the formations? Ultimates arising and passing away. Because they arise in formations, don't they? Like object, sense space, consciousness, perception, and so forth. Liss. I do something similar sometimes. Sometimes I think. Jumping on sounds or sensations, ready to note them, over-noting, which leads to restlessness. Yes. I label it as impatience, desire for results. Yes. Good. And it's underlying it is, I think often for people, what's underlying it is doubt. Because the problem is we don't know, even though I've just stated exactly where the course of insight, the progress of insight will actually take you, you don't know what that means, really. So it is a faith issue. I mean, because I had that with practicing samatha. It's like, well, I clearly I have not done samatha in a past life. I don't know what I was doing, but it would have been nice if I'd spent a little bit more time developing samatha to save me time now, but I'm having to do it now. And a lot of my wrong application has been based in doubt, doubting where I'm going, not knowing where I'm going, and making unnecessary adjustments, trying too hard, trying to force it, doing all kinds of things, playing with it rather than just following the instruction. So what's the point? So I'm just using that as an analogy. Or illustration. So underlying the what might be underlying the over-noting is a doubt and wanting to be sure, wanting to be certain by, trying to nail it all the time. Whereas what's actually needed is a much more loose, passive, contented approach. Starting with contentment. So you're absolutely right, Liz. Label it as impatience, desire for results. The interesting thing is what happens, and this is just repeating what I said earlier, but what happens when you restrain acting on that urge, that impulse to overnote? That will tell you exactly the reason why you're doing it. It is a shape. It is a. It's difficult to say. Shape shifty. You're trying to trick me into swearing, Liz. It almost worked. So if you restrain from acting on that impulse will it will become sort of magnified, and you'll start to be able to recognise what that underlying drive is. And acknowledging what that underlying drive is, clearly comprehending it, releases you from it. So you understand what it is, and you go, I don't have to act out of that. And it passes away, and what's left is that lovely sense of contentment. Amy. So is samatha meditation primarily to make dry vipassana more doable, and is not in itself necessary for enlightenment to happen? So many people get confused about this, Amy. And what I like to do is to remind them of the Buddha's story. He did all the jhanas under the guidance of 2 meditation masters after he renounced his worldly life and he went into the forest. He did them all. And he came out of that saying, no, the jhanas do not produce true enlightenment. They give you a temporary reprieve, a temporary release, because all hindrances, all craving for life to be different than it is removed when you're in a state of deep absorption. the sense of duality is gone when you're in a deep state of absorption. However, that deep state of absorption is still the world. It's still transient. It has to be worked. You have to work to get it. Then you get it, you enjoy it, and then you lose it. It's only a temporary release. That was his great understanding. So that led him into his 6 years of austerities, and he came out of that and said, no, that doesn't work either. And then what he did is he remembered the jhanas. He realized that actually any form of becoming is just more action that produces more results, and that's endless. So what he did is he used the jhanas to purify his mind temporarily, get rid of any sort of stray thinking and that sort of thing. Had a perfectly lucid, calm, concentrated mind with which he just then looked at experience unfolding. And he saw everything as it really is. So his enlightenment wasn't because of the jhana, it's just the jhana gave him the best possible supporting conditions. But he was out of jhana, he was in ordinary consciousness in order to attend to simply observing what was actually unfolding in his experience, and that's when he discovered the truth of things as they are. So you can go any way. So he'd already accomplished all the jhanas, but what he finally realised was that enlightenment is not the outcome of anything that you do. So it was a very handy supporting condition, if I can put it like that. I hope that helps. And there's another technical point, which is certainly my experience was reaching the end of each path, the supramundane path and fruition had the jhana factors want to be accurate in the way that I put it, that there seemed, in hindsight looking back, it does appear that with each fruition it was like an equivalent to a jhana level concentration. That's probably the best way of putting it. So for instance, with the fourth fruition, the first fruition was accompanied by astonishing bliss and happiness and so forth. The fourth jhana was accompanied with, the fourth fruition was accompanied with equanimity. Bit technical, but true nonetheless. So enlightenment is not the outcome of any... This is the paradox. Enlightenment is not the outcome of anything that you do, but unless you walk the path, enlightenment can't happen. Let you stew on that for a while. All the comments have dried up now, I've said that. How long have we been going today? 58 minutes, so we're approaching the end. Liz, your doubt. Your doubt comment is getting lots of likes. I think I'll like it too. In fact, I think I'll love it. Okay, guys. Any more for any more? Okay, so no other comments coming in, so... Oh, Leslie. Thank you, Paul. I now realise that I have many more steps to take on the path, the salt course, as I sit on the path without pushing forward. It is such a strange combination of learning how to sit and be with whatever arises, and then being confronted with so many issues. But that is the path. Dave, thank you. Hope all's well at home, Dave. Oh, I meant to thank you for your kind gesture with the film. I didn't reply to your phone message, but that was very kind of you. I had actually already seen that film. It was very good. Knives Out, if anyone hasn't seen it, very good film. Okay, guys. Good. Keith, hope you're well. Thanks for tuning in, guys. It's not quite the same as being here on a Wednesday evening, I know. Oh, Brother Nigel wanted me to say that you can all go to the 8:45 meditation. Obviously in spirit, not actually physically. If you've got your out-of-body mental skills sorted out, then please do go and give them a help. Ebry, you made it. Great. Sue? Robert and Nat? So glad you could make it. Right, so we're over an hour now, so I'm going to call it a day there. So I'm going to have a day off tomorrow, because on Thursdays we have a Dhamma talk with the full-timers, which is an hour long, and then I've got a phone interview with somebody after that, so having a break is always a good idea, isn't it? So, yeah, and then I will, of course, let you know in the morning. Still working on the out-of-body thing though. Oh yeah, don't worry, so am I, Leslie. Lots of chuckles. This is serious business, Liz, you know that. Right, glad you guys have enjoyed it. If anyone feels they can share any of these live streams, I'm going to see if I can actually put this live stream up on YouTube as well, because that might be helpful for people, although they won't get the comments, which is why I wanted to, make sure the comments were nice and tight, so I could just say them. Okay, guys, lovely being in touch with you all, and see you again soon. I've got to work out how to end this live stream now. Oh, how embarrassing.